Hello, in this video we're going to be talking about common denominators and equivalent fractions. Yesterday we practiced adding and subtracting fractions with like denominators, but not all fractions have like denominators. So today we're going to practice making sure that they do. In order to find a common denominator, you have to find equivalent fractions. So there are two ways to do this. We're going to do both of them in this video. The first way is to just multiply the denominators. This always works, but sometimes you end up with a really large number. So the second way is to use a list of the multiples of those numbers. Both of these ways work. We're going to try the first one and then the second one, and then you can decide what works best for you. Let's jump in. So the first way we're going to do is to multiply the denominators. So we have the fraction 1/3 and 1/5. All we're going to do is multiply the denominators by each other. So I'm going to end up with two fractions again. Both of them with 15 on the bottom because 3 times 5 is 15. So in order to find the equivalent fraction, we have to think about what we actually did. I multiplied the 3 times 5 to get 15. Now, if I multiply the denominator by 5, I have to multiply the numerator by 5. Whatever you do to the numerator, you have to do whatever you do to the denominator, you have to do to the numerator to find the equivalent fraction. So I said 3 times 5, so I'm going to say 1 times 5. So we have 5 over 15 as our equivalent fraction for 1/3. And for 1/5, I multiplied it by 3 to get me to 15. So I have to multiply the 1 by 3. So now my equivalent fractions are 5/15 and 3/15. Let's do another one like this. We have 2/3 and 5/9. So to do the way where you just multiply the denominators, I know that both of my fractions are going to have 27 on the bottom. Ooh, my brain hurt there for a second. 27 on the bottom. Now let's go up and make those fractions equivalent. I know that to get to 27, I multiplied 3 times 9. And if I do it to the denominator, you have to do it to the numerator. So we're going to multiply our 2 times 9 and get 18 27ths. Now for the second fraction, I know I multiplied 9 times 3 to get to 27. So I have to do the same thing to the numerator that you did to the denominator. We're going to say 5 times 3 is 15. So our fractions started out as 2/3 and 5/9, but because we used the multiply the denominator method to find common denominators and equivalent fractions, we now have 18 27ths and 15 27ths. So you couldn't have said 2/3 minus 5/9 because the denominators were different, but you could say 18 27ths minus 15 27ths. And that's why we're finding common denominators. Let's look at this one. 2/9 and 1/15. So this is one of those examples where we're probably going to end up with a pretty big number because we're multiplying the denominators together. So let's go ahead and multiply those. We've got 15 times 9. 9 times 5 is 45. 9 times 1 is 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So our denominator is going to be 135. That's a big denominator. But that's what happens when you multiply them together. It's easier in some ways and harder in others. So because I multiplied 9 times 15 to get to 135, I have to multiply the numerator by the same exact number. Excuse me. So we're going to say 2 times 15. So that gets me 30. So 2/9, an equivalent fraction for that is 30 over 135. Now let's do the other side. I multiplied the 15 times 9 to get me to 135. And if I multiply the denominator by it, you have to multiply the numerator by the exact same number. So I'm going to multiply my numerator by 9. 9 over 135. So same as before. I couldn't say 2/9 minus 1/15, but I could say 30 over 135 minus 9 over 135. That's how I find common denominators. Let's take a look at this other method to see if you like it any better. The other way is to use a list. We've got 9 and 15 again. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a common multiples T-chart. So just over here to the side, I'm going to put 9 and 15. You could do this on scratch paper. And we're going to find the common multiples. So all I'm going to do is list the multiples. So 9 times 1 is 9. 9 times 2 is 18. 9 times 3 is 27. 9 times 4 is 36. 9 times 5 is 45. I'm probably going to stop there and see what we can do. 15 times 1 is 15. 15 times 2 is 30. 15 times 3 is 45. Looky there. My common multiple is going to be 45. That's a lot smaller than 135. So all we're going to do, now that we have our least common denominator, is find our equivalent fractions. So I know that I multiplied 9 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get to 45. And if I multiply the denominator by it, you have to multiply the numerator by the exact same number. And 5 times 5 is 25. 15 I multiplied by 1, 2, 3, much smaller than 9. And if I multiply the denominator by it, I'm going to multiply the numerator by 3. So that gets me 12/45. Similar fractions, but my denominator is a lot smaller because I decided to use this way instead of the multiply the denominators way. Again, either way is totally fine, whichever works for you. So my equivalent fractions for 5/9 is 25/45, and 4/15 is 12/45. Let's do another one. This is another one we're going to make a list for. So I'm going to go over here and make my T-chart. I've got 6 and 21. So I know I've got 6 times 2 is 12, times 3 is 18, times 4 is 24, times 5 is 30, and then I've got 36. Let's go to 21 and see what we can do. 21, 42, 63. Uh-oh. Looks like we're going to have to keep going. So 36, 6 times 7 is 42. Look, there it is. You just have to keep trying. My least common multiple is going to be 42. So if my denominator, my common denominator, is 42. Wait, let's back up. I think I just dropped a vocabulary term and didn't explain it. I said least common multiple. Remember, this T-chart is a T-chart of our multiples. Least means the less, and common means what they have in common. So your least would be your lowest. Common multiple is the one that's the smallest that they both have in their T-chart. That's why it's called the least common multiple. Let's go back. I know my denominator is going to be 42 as my common denominator. To get to 42, I multiplied 6 times 7. And if I multiply the denominator by it, I have to multiply the numerator. So I'm going to get 7/42. I know that I did 21 times 2 to get to 42. So I need to multiply my 4 times 2 as well. And that's going to get me to 8. So this method, I had to make a list. But if I had multiplied 21 times 6, my denominator would be 126 instead of 42. So if you're adding or subtracting after this, it's going to be easier to make a list. Let's go ahead to our last one we're going to do before we jump into some practice. Wow, 14 and 42. Let's make that least common multiple T-chart. All right, so 14 and 14 times 2 is 28. Ooh, we got to keep going. So let's say 28 plus 14. Actually, let's do 14 times 3. I think multiplication is a lot easier than addition. 14 times 3 is 42. Hey, look at that. That was super easy. Instead of multiplying 14 times 42, which would have been a really big number, I found out that my least common multiple is actually just 42. And that totally works because 42 times 1 would have given me 42. So much easier than having to multiply. So my common denominator is 42. To get to 42, I had to multiply 14 times 1, 2, 3. And if I multiply the denominator by the number, I have to multiply the numerator. So we're going to have 15 times 5 times 3 is 15. And to get to 42, I didn't do anything. So I'm just going to bring down that 8. Because really, I just multiplied that 42 times 1. So the 8 times 1, you bring it down. So my equivalent fraction to 5/14 is 15/42. And my equivalent fraction to 8 over 42 is 8 over 42. This lets them have a common denominator. In the next video, we're going to get some practice in. Make sure if you have any questions, you rewatch the video and then come ask your teacher.